No, but they should, and actually, Buzz, people need to be giving all of what you just said a lot of thought, but many of the listeners and others out in the space community are very, very concerned that we're facing delays and deferments about some of the basic things that you talked about, like the moon and et cetera. What is your recommendation? What can we do? What should the space community be doing to make sure that these plans stay on a prime directive timetable?
Well, I think the experts in the space community, the experienced people who are not agenda-oriented or who have a particular agenda should be tapped into for their wisdom about what we should do. Now, I think a large number would agree that at the beginning of a contentious second term election year, this president, who is, held in such marginal esteem, had the guts to commit this country to decades and decades of change and billions and billions of dollars of reorienting what we're doing. Now, you don't reorient something without change, and some things have to stop and some things have to get picked up. And transition from one major program to another is extremely difficult. Look what happened when we transitioned from Apollo. Now, fortunately, the thinkers had in mind some ways of using Apollo hardware other than going to the moon. Let's take the Saturn rocket, let's take the third stage, and don't put fuel in it, but make a space station out of it. Skylab. We visited that thing 3 times, and we left the backup in the Air and Space Museum. Nobody was smart enough then to predict what we should have done, but there are many of us today who didn't have a piece to play in those decisions to defend. People always defend the decisions they make, and they won't acknowledge that maybe they could have thought things out differently if we had had a better judgment. But I think most people would say that we should have flown Skylab 2, joined the 2 of them together, and launched Apollo command modules with 6 people in them on Saturn 1s, instead of building a shuttle that was underfunded and perhaps had characteristics that maybe our mentors advised us against. And as Werner von Braun said, in my estimation, we should not put human beings on solid rockets. Okay, well, you can like that or not like it, but a solid rocket was at the cause of our first major fatality in space. And we improved, revised, and went right back to solid rockets again. And built a whole factory to build advanced solid rockets. Okay, a couple of engineers who had experience. My engineer of StarCraft boosters, Hugh Davis, who was a maintenance officer in F-86s in the Korean War while I was shooting at the MiGs and F-86s. We ran into each other, had very common thoughts, because he was a program manager of LEM 5 that Neil and I ended on the moon. And we sort of had similar thoughts and began to compare notes, and what we sort of dedicated ourselves to was reusable rocket boosters, StarCraft boosters, to replace solid rockets. Now, you got to have the Air Force and NASA kind of working together, which they didn't do many, many times in the past. And you really need a high flight rate to begin to take the full advantage of reusable boosters. And that's still the truth today. Okay, so we moved to do something else in 2002. People were talking about flying the shuttle till 2020 or 2025. So we started looking at ejectable pods. Without going into all the details, the 8-person pod was unaffordable. However, who needs the shuttle? Let's just launch the pod. So we came up with what we called Aquila, and Altair was the spacecraft, not the lander. But Aquila, the Flying Eagle, was essentially today's Ares 3. Minimum modification of the shuttle launch system. 4 segment solids, a tank, the same size, 3 engines in the bottom, at 2/3 thrust. You lose an engine, it's not catastrophic, you continue the mission. And we had an RL-10 on the upper stage of Atlas V. You lose the RL-10 at ET set, you got enough RCS to get into orbit, bring the spacecraft and the crew back. Now, any of those 2 losses on Boeing's or Lockheed's orbital space plane, and you lost the spacecraft and the crew were in the drink. Okay? We had a better solution. What did NASA do? They canceled the orbital space plane project and moved on. Well, they moved on to implement the vision for space exploration. So we didn't need our Space Vision Institute, which we proposed to NASA. Now, whatever that was, I think we're rejuvenating the thinking about that as we face transition into a new administration. And it turns out that I'm not alone. It looks like there's a very capable organization, the Eisenhower Institute, that's been thinking the same way. And I think you'll see in the future, not too long from now, some very able people looking at a number of things that could or could not be changed, alternatives. And they'll be looked at and evaluated after at least 4 years or so into implementing the vision. Have we implemented a wonderful vision in the most appropriate way? Once you get something going, it's kind of hard to stop. So you got to have good reasons to stop something maybe or alter its path. And those things will be looked at.
Buzz,